Hi friends, you are all welcome at Drishti Media channel, that is YouTube channel. Today we are going to discuss in brief budget as it is required for our examination, that is UPSC Civil Services examination or Provincial Civil Services PCS examination or many other competitive examination. They look at budget and they frame questions. So our objective is to discuss budget in a way that different kind of questions which could be framed around it could be answered easily and effectively. So let's look at budget this way. Budget 2022-23. Before looking at broader provisions of the budget, we should just as a precautionary measure look at certain basic phrases or basic concepts which are frequently used in discussion of budget. One, that is financial year. You know, financial year begins on 1st of April and completes on 31st March next year. So, budget 2022-23 is meant for 1st April 2022 to 31st March 2023. This year would be called budget year. So, there are three different years are also mentioned in budget. One is called budget year, that is the year for which budget is meant. One is called current year, that is the year which is still going on. So, budget year is 2022-23, current year is 2021-22. It will complete on 31st of March this year, that is 22. It started last year on 1st of April 21, and there is another year which is mentioned, that is previous year. Previous year is the year when corona epidemic struck the world. So, this is one of the exceptional years in recent history, and this is of course dangerous year, but there was a budget presented for this year on 1st February 2020. Nobody was anticipating that time that we are going to face such a kind of epidemic. This year's budget was presented last year on 1st of February 2021, and next year's budget, that is budget year budget, has been presented recently on 1st of February 2022. In this year's budget, that is on 1st of February, Finance Minister frequently used budget year, current year, previous year. Many kinds of data were presented for budget year, for current year, for previous year. So, just to avoid any confusion, we have just to be conscious that there are three different years which are mentioned while discussing budget. That is part one. Next thing is that within a financial year, whether it is previous year or current year or budget year, there are sub time periods. This 1 year time period is broadly divided into two halves. First half which begins on 1st of April and completes on 30th of September. This is further subdivided into two quarters, quarter 1 and quarter 2. Of course, quarter 1 begins on 1st of April itself and completes on 30th of June, and quarter 2 begins on 1st of July and completes on 30th of September. Then comes second half. First half is generally also mentioned as H1, first half yearly, and second half is also called H2. This is also subdivided into quarter 3 and quarter 4. So, just for your convenience, quarter 3 begins on 1st of October and completes on 31st of December, while quarter 4 begins on 1st of January and completes on 31st of March. Many data like GDP data, GDP for the whole financial year and GDP for the first half, GDP for the second half, GDP growth rate for the whole financial year, GDP growth rate in the first half, GDP growth rate in the second half, then again GDP growth rate in the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter, tax collection for the whole year, tax collection for the first half, second half. There could be many data trends which are given in the budget documents, and we need to be very particular about conscious of it and what could be the trends. There could be some upward trends in collection of taxes, there could be some downward towards in the second half or in the next quarter kind of thing. For example, when the epidemic struck the world in the month of March 2020, that was the fourth quarter of 1920 rather, and in the first quarter of 2021, which began on 1st April 2020, the epidemic continued and became more and more powerful, and lockdown was there in our whole country and many other parts of the world. So, economic activity shrunk due to that lockdown, GDP declined, GDP growth rate turned negative. In the second quarter, the trend continued. In the third quarter, there was some recovery because there was some opening up. So, quarterly trends are important in recent times due to a specific situation. Okay. So, these phrases are useful. You have just to keep in mind all these things. Apart from these things, we have to know about budget also this way, that while budget is presented, many kinds of documents are available. One is budget speech, which is delivered by the finance minister. Then there is annual financial statement, which is mentioned in Article 112 of the Constitution of India, that the government is expected to present before the Parliament an annual financial statement, which is popularly called budget. Then there are many other documents which are required under FRBM Act of 2003. One is macroeconomic framework statement. And there could be a question on these facts only in PT, that which kind of documents are presented in the budget. Next is, which is required under the same act, mid-term fiscal policy statement. And there is a mid-term fiscal strategy statement. And you have to be conscious that there is a mid-term policy statement and mid-term strategy statement. There could be certain strategy implicit in the policy that is required to be made obvious and explicit. So, these are the important documents. Apart from that, there are certain explanatory notes which are useful for examination point of view, and the basic theme of all these statements are also presented as budget at a glance, which we are going to use for our own discussion, and which are the important financial statements are given in that budget at a glance, and through those documents and the data we will try to decode the trends in the economy and the trends in the budget. Okay. So, Understanding that these are the important documents and this is what we have to study while analyzing budget. We will take up the budget speech, not directly, indirectly. Finance Minister has talked about there are certain important phrases. A new phrase which come into vogue is 𝐈𝐀𝐒 𝐏𝐫𝐞𝐥𝐢𝐬, that is a kind of pious period. So, it has been said by the government that India at 75, that is 75 years of independence happened, and India at 100. After 25 years from now, India would be at 100. So, this period from 75 years since independence to 100 years since independence is been declared as 𝐈𝐀𝐒, a kind of pious period. In economic planning process, this is a long-term planning perspective. 25 years is a long-term period. Never earlier we had a plan for such a long period. We used to have a planning for 5 years, we used to have also planning for 10 years and maximum 15 years. Very few documents were prepared on the basis of 20-year planning, like National Population Policy 2000 was meant for a longer period, 2045. So, 𝐈𝐀𝐒 is also kind of an example of a long-term period, a longer-term period planning, though the planning word has not been officially and formally utilized, but that is implicit. So, these are there. Now, again coming to the question paper and looking at the way questions are framed, we will directly come to the data analysis part. So, first of all, we will see how this budget was prepared considering the fiscal position of the government, that is the amount of money the government fund is going to receive, government treasury is going to receive, an amount of fund which is likely to come out from there. So, let us look at first of all budget at a glance. Many of you are aware that there is a revenue receipt and then there is capital receipt, and we add up the two, we get total receipt. Now, look at the trends. If you look at this way, that revenue receipt in the year when epidemic happened, the data is actual data, and the current year data, there are two kinds of data. One is budget estimate and another is revised estimate. So, budget estimate is a kind of data which the government is expecting while presenting budget, when the year has not begun yet. Year is going to begin 2 months from now. But after 6-7 months of experience or 6-7 months of actual collection, administration is induced to revise the estimate. So, generally in the month of November and December, these budget estimates are revised and we get some amended data. So, for example, in the year 2020-21, revenue receipt was 16,33,920 crore. When this year's budget was presented last February, we expected that it will increase to 17,88,424 crore. But after revision, it has been revised upward. Now, forget the data, we have to understand the trend of the economy implicit. We know that revenue, whether it is tax collection or non-tax collection, and particularly tax collection, depends upon economic activities in any country. Both direct taxes and indirect taxes are dependent upon economic activities. If economic activities are expanding, increasing, tax collection increases automatically, and that is called buoyancy of tax collection. Tax collection was expected when the budget was presented 15,45,000, it is now been revised up to 17,65,000 crores, more than 2,20,000 crores of increase as compared to budget estimate, which suggests that economy is recovering after dipping in 2020-21 and in the first half of 21-22, economy is recovering much faster than the government expected it while presenting budget last year. So that's a good news that economy is recovering. Next year, for which the budget has been presented recently, revenue estimate, tax collection estimate is 19,34,000 rupees, lakh crore rupees. So another 1.5 lakh crores of increase or 1.7 lakh crores of increase. There is government hopes that our economic recovery would continue. So what the government is projecting that next year in 2022-23, our GDP growth rate is likely to be 9.2%. This year in 2021-22, it has been 6.8%. In 2021, it was of course negative. So after turning negative GDP growth rate, that means our GDP actually declined by more than 7% in the previous year, that is 2021. In this current year, it is recovering. So there is a positive growth rate, almost equal to or slightly less than the negative growth rate last year. Next year, it is likely to be 9%. If you look at the entire period of pre-COVID and post-COVID, our growth rate would be very insignificant. It will be slightly more than 1%. But we will reach not only pre-COVID GDP level, but it will improve further. Is also, given the situation in the world, is a news of relief and is a kind of satisfactory development. So tax collection depends upon GDP activity, and tax buoyancy is basically a very important feature of fiscal statement, fiscal position. Capital receipt basically is market borrowing. As you can see that out of 18,75,916 crores, 18,18,000 was market borrowing. Even next year, out of 17,40,000 crores roughly of capital nature, 16,61,000 is market borrowing. Other receipt means this is actually disinvestment. Practically, this is disinvestment proceeds. Disinvestment proceeds in 2020-21 was only 38,000 crores. In the current year, which is still going on, government expected it to be 1,75,000 crores, but has now revised down it to 78,000 crores. So disinvestment, it is almost every year's affair. Government starts with a great expectations of disinvestment, but after 6-7 months, the private sector response is not as enthusiastic as the government expects them to. So it is generally revised down. Next year disinvestment target is only 65,000 crore, less than this year's performance or achievement. That means disinvestment is not likely to be a robust kind of activity next year either. But that is part of capital receipt. Now the question point of view, first of all you have to understand this way, that there could be certain questions of identity, that which receipts are called revenue receipts and which receipts are called capital receipts. If you look at receipts here, revenue receipt on the upper part and capital receipt on the lower part, you have to look at this way, that revenue receipt is here, which is subdivided into two parts, tax and non-tax. Largely it is tax receipt, but there is some amount of non-tax also, 14 lakh tax, 2 lakh crore non-tax. Here 19 lakh tax, 2.7 lakh non-tax. And then capital receipt. Capital receipts includes basically three items. Most important, that is biggest, is market borrowing. Second is other, which is actually disinvestment. And third is recovery of loans. Which is insignificant amount, very small amount. if you look at the total capital receipts 17,40,000, recovery of loan is only 14,000 crore, which is almost kind of, you can ignore that. If you look at expenditure this side, expenditure is also subdivided into revenue expenditure. You can see it here, item number 10, total expenditure subdivided into revenue account. Within revenue expenditure, you have got interest payment, which is biggest item mentioned here. You have got defense also here. You have got subsidy here. You have got grants to states and UTs and some other expenditures. And there is capital expenditure. Within capital, we have investment, we have a repayment of debt, and we have extension of loan. So, this is the overall structure of the budget. The upper part of the budget where we mention revenue receipts and revenue expenditure, or that part of budget where revenue receipts and revenue budget are mentioned, is called revenue budget, and the other part where capital receipts and capital expenditures are mentioned is called capital budget. So, there is one classification, revenue budget versus capital budget. If you look at here, item 1 is part of revenue budget, item 10 is part of a revenue budget, item 4 is capital budget, and item 13 is part of capital budget. So, this can be rearranged this way just to make it more visible, easier to comprehend. Now, if you look at the data trend and deficit related trend, that is excess of revenue expenditure over revenue receipt is called revenue deficit. Most of you know that. Revenue expenditure minus revenue receipt. This is a general conceptual question, they ask it here. This is mentioned here, item number 15, 10 minus 1, 10 is revenue expenditure, 1 is revenue receipt. Similarly, we can also calculate capital deficit, though we are having negative capital deficit. Our capital expenditure is less 7,50,000 crores and our capital receipt is more 17,40,000 crores. So, if you put this data here, capital expenditure mentioned, come here, item 13, 7,50,000, 7.5 lakh crores, and capital receipt is 17.4 lakh crores. So, if we calculate, you will get it almost 9.9 minus. So, capital deficit is negative, which means we are having capital surplus. Revenue deficit is positive. If you look at revenue expenditure, that is mentioned here, item 10, 31.95 rather. So, if you deduct from 31.95 22 lakh crore, you will get roughly 10 lakh crores, 9.9 you can get. So, revenue deficit, one to take notice of is that revenue deficit is equal to negative of capital deficit, or revenue deficit is equal to capital surplus. So, if you add up these two, you will get that overall budget is balanced. Overall budget is balanced is also said this way, that if you look at budget deficit, which is total expenditures minus total receipt, You can take the total expenditure data from here, 39.44 or 39.45. Total receipt is here, item number 8. So 9 minus 8, that is also same, 39.45. So budget deficit is 0. Now the question part. Budget deficit is 0 is a kind of a statement. Why it is 0? Because a revenue deficit is equal to capital surplus. Or you can also say that revenue deficit is equal to minus capital deficit. So if you add up the two, you will get 0. Revenue deficit plus capital deficit is equal to budget deficit. So if you add up 9.9 plus minus 9.9, you get 0. So assertion reasoning question could be framed. This is how you have to look at the data trend, always imagining what kind of question they can frame. Now if you look at the trend part, as I said earlier, our tax collection is good, encouraging. So that suggests that our economy is progressing faster as compared to many other important economies, bigger economies. That is what the finance minister also said in the budget speech, that we are the fastest moving major economy. If you look at, ignore minor economies. Point of concern is that due to epidemic, our market borrowing increased immensely, much more than expected. If you look at from the data from expectation part, that what was expected earlier and what is the actual position. If you look at deficits, from 8-9 data trend has been given. From 8-9, that is the year when subprime crisis happened. Many of you could have forgotten that, but in September, on 15 September to be particular, 2008, Lehman Brothers a big company in America, a big financial company, became bankrupt, followed by bankruptcy of many other institutions of medium and small sizes. So that crisis was called that time subprime crisis. And that crisis had created a recession in the whole world economy. To begin with, in USA economy, then Japanese economy, but because other economies are dependent upon both, not Japanese, European economy and USA. Because China is dependent upon European economy and USA, Japan is also dependent, India is also dependent. So that subprime crisis is spilled over as economic recession, and particularly in the Western economy and broadly into the rest part of the economy. So even during that time, government had to spend more. Whenever there is, the economy is in crisis, government is expected to spend more so as to create kind of pump prime the economy, so as to create additional demand in the economy. So that year, from 6.1% of fiscal deficit, as the blue line suggests, and 4.6% of revenue deficit, as the red line suggests, and primary deficit 2.6%, it increased to 6.6 and 5.3 and 3.2, but thereafter it dipped, again increased. So many of you know that this recession was called that time of W-shaped. First dip, recovery, bigger dip, and then recovery. So first crisis, deficit up, recovery, deficit down, second dip, again deficit up. Thereafter there was recovery, so deficit was down and down and down. So whenever the economy is in crisis, deficit increases, all kinds of deficits, fiscal deficit, revenue deficit, and primary deficit. So to be very clear about it, if some of you are not very clear about the concepts of deficit, once again I will suggest you that revenue deficit is revenue expenditure minus revenue receipts. Fiscal deficit is basically nowadays market borrowing, but by definition it is total expenditure minus primary receipts, and primary receipts means non-debt receipts. In any way you can look at it, primary deficit is the third important concept of deficit, as here trend chart suggesting, means fiscal deficit minus interest payment. And there is a new concept introduced in 2009 and trend chart is given from 2011, that is called effective revenue deficit. Effective revenue deficit is revenue deficit minus grants for capital asset creation. Now, to understand this phrase, you know that central government gives different kinds of grants to states. Some of the grants are given just to support the ongoing schemes, and the schemes are meant to directly help the people without creating any permanent asset which contributes in production activity. But some of the grants are given by the central government to state government with a direct objective that this grant amount would be utilized to create capital asset. So, if that grant amount which is given by center to the state is reduced from revenue deficit, the remaining part of a revenue deficit is called effective revenue deficit. So, naturally effective revenue deficit would always be less than revenue deficit. Effective revenue deficit has been shown with green color, revenue deficit with red color. So, starting from 2011-12, we are having a trend line of effective revenue deficit also. Until 18-19, almost all the deficits were having somewhat declining trend and there was some stability. From 16-17 it was 0.4, 0.4, 0.4 primary deficit. From 16-17 your revenue deficit had increased slightly in 17-18 also, but fiscal deficit was 3.5, 3.5, 3.4. So, you have to be a little bit particular about this period. 16-17, 17-18, 18-19. There was some turbulence in the fiscal position even during this period, maybe due to demonetization and maybe also due to introduction of GST. There was some turbulence, but overall it was stable. Compared to that, in 1920 we had a increase, though epidemic came in the last month, the 12th month of the year, March 2020, but in spite of that, in 1920 all the deficit figures increased, and in 2021, that is last year, it increased sharply to 9.2%, which is a new peak. This kind of fiscal deficit we have not seen for decades. This kind of fiscal deficit was seen in pre-91 position. In 1991 particularly, our fiscal deficit was 8.6%, and in 91-92 when the new budget was presented by Mr. Manmohan Singh, it was sharply reduced from 8.6% to 6.6%. Since then we have seen, once again we had seen it in between, but this is highest FD in recent decades. This could be a question in PT. Revenue deficit 7.3% as against the target of FRBM Act. FRBM Act expects that the fiscal deficit should be less than 3.5%, and the deadline is March 2021, last year. Against that target of 3.5% FD, our actual FD was 9.2% and RD target was 0%. Against a target of 0% FD, actual RD revenue deficit was 7.3% last year. Next year, that is 22-23, government expects that, which is given in the budget, that our FD would be 6.4%. Next year, that is 22-23, RD would be 3.8% against a target of 0% FRBM target. Our effective revenue deficit would be 2.6% and primary deficit would be 2.8%. Now, here is a scope for question. Look at these figures. If in an examination you are expected to arrange the deficit in descending order, in any other year you will be putting FD number 1, RD number 2, effective RD number 3 and PD number 4. PD is lowest always in every other year. Look at it. In every other year PD is lowest, ERD is second lowest, RD is second from top and FD is highest. But next year effective revenue deficit will be lowest, number 4 in deficit count. FD and RD would be of course number 1 and number 2. So, effective revenue deficit and PD are substituting their rank. Here is a scope for question. You have just to be particular about it. Okay. So, this is about data trend. Now, if you look at amounts of fiscal deficit, 18,18,000 crore fiscal deficit last year. This year it was initially projected to be 15 lakh crore, but now been revised up to 15,91,000 crore. From 15,07,000 crore to 15,91,000 crore. There is a huge upward revision of almost 85 lakh crores. You can say 85,000 crores. In spite of increase of 85,000 crores, in decimal figure, in percentage figure, it is very slight increase, 6.8 to 6.9. And next year it is going to be further more, 16,61,000 crore, but the percentage figure is less, 6.4. So, here again there is a scope for question. If we look at absolute amount of fiscal deficit, that is going to increase next year. But if you look at the amount of fiscal deficit compared to the GDP as a percentage of GDP, that is going to decline. So, fiscal deficit is going to increase, but it will be less than, even in absolute amount, less than that of 2020-21. Similarly, revenue deficit, if you look at, it will be reducing both in absolute terms as well as percentage terms. So, there are differences in trends. While the absolute amount of FD is going to increase, percentage of that is going to decline. But revenue deficit is both declining next year in absolute terms, that is crores of rupees, and percentage term, that is 3.8% of GDP. Effective revenue deficit is also going to reduce in both absolute terms and percentage. Primary deficit is also going to reduce in both absolute terms and in percentage. So, this way, here this is an exception. Other things are, you can look at odd man this way. Okay, this part is important. Here there is a scope for question. We have to look at tax structure. There are questions here also. First kind of question is that arrange the following taxes in descending order or ascending order. So, you have to take note of, first of all, amount. Gross tax revenue next year would be 27,57,820 rupees. Out of that, corporation tax, which you know is a tax which is levied on the profit earned by production institutions, particularly corporate institution, company particularly, or cooperative institution. So, kind of tax on profit, 7,20,000 would be number 1. Biggest amount comes from corporate. Taxes on income of persons, individuals, which is also called personal income tax. This is also called PIT, personal income tax, and this is also called CIT, corporate income tax. This will be number 2 next year. Then comes GST, 7,80,000 crores. And then union excise duty, 3,35,000 crores. And then comes custom duty. So, this is a very popular question. Arrange the following taxes in descending order, ascending order. You just to remember the order. But if you look at last year corporate income tax was 635 and 615 was personal income tax. GST was 570, rather 675. Union excise duty was 394. This was there. If you look at the year of crisis, corporate income tax was 457, income tax was 487. So, if you look at this year, this was number 1. Okay, let's renumber it. This is actually 780 number 1. This is 720 number 2. This is number 3. This is number 4. This is number 5. This is wrong. So, if you look at this year, in 2021, GST was still the biggest, number 1, 548, but number 2 was income tax, number 3 was corporation tax, number 4 was excise duty, and 5 was. So, here is scope for question because there is a change in the composition. Corporate income tax is growing this year faster compared to 2020-21, and it is likely to grow faster even next year. Corporate income tax collection is growing faster than personal income tax collection, suggests that our economy, particularly the organized economy where companies are operating, is recovering fast. That is another evidence. So, one evidence is overall tax collection, and more particular evidence is corporate income tax collection verifies that our economic growth rate is recovering fast, and that is a good news. So, from that perspective, this ordering is required and you are expected to know that. Okay. If you look at the non-tax revenue which we saw there, within non-tax revenue the biggest amount comes from next year other non-tax revenue. Here again there is a question on ordering, descending ascending order. Second biggest amount comes from dividend and profits of PSUs, of course, public sector enterprises and PSUs. Third comes from interest receipts. As we noticed earlier, perhaps you had taken note of it, that government extends loans to state government, to central government employees and to friendly countries also. The loan which is given by the central government earns interest for the central government. So, that is interest receipt, number 3, and then comes that receipt of the union territories, and external grant is the lowest amount, very small amount. So, that all constitutes 2,69,651 crore. This is about 22-23. Other receipt would be number 1, dividend would be number 2, but this year, which is still going on, dividend and profit is number 1, other receipts are number 2, and interest receipt remains number 3. So, here again there is a change in the trend in the composition of non-tax revenue. So, wherever there is some kind of changes in the trend, there is scope for some question. So, you have just to be a little conscious about it. that the UPSC can ask questions, or in PCs also questions can be framed. Now let us look at another trend line. Trends in tax receipts. You can see that this orange line is gross tax receipt. This red line is direct tax, and the maroon or black line is indirect tax. In 13-14, the red line direct tax was bigger than black line, which is indirect tax. If in any gross tax collection direct tax is more and indirect tax is less, this structure of tax is called progressive. This could be conceptual question in the examination, they have asked several times. If in any country, in any state, local body, if you look at the gross amount of tax and within that you find that direct tax amount is more and indirect tax amount is less, that is called progressive, because the burden of direct taxes falls generally on well-off people, generally rich people or upper middle class people. Lower income strata is not targeted under direct tax, whether it is corporate income tax or personal income tax. Those who are earning less than 5 lakh rupees, they are not expected to pay tax. So, direct tax burden falls on well-off people who are able to pay taxes. But if you look at indirect taxes, which includes GST or excise duty or custom duty, which is imposed on goods and services, and the goods and services are purchased both by rich people and poor people and middle class people, the burden of indirect taxes falls on all kinds of people, whether they are strong, able to pay tax, or they are weak. Because their burden falls even on weaker persons, that is called, which indirect tax is called regressive in nature. So, if in overall tax collection, share of indirect tax is more, the whole structure is called regressive. If in overall tax structure, direct tax share is more, that is called progressive. Now, look at the trend. In 13-14, because direct tax was more, indirect tax was less, progressive. In 14-15 also it was progressive, but in 15-16, while the share of direct tax remained a little flattish, share of indirect tax increased from 4.4% to 5.2%. As the share of indirect taxes increased in 15-16, progressive coefficient of tax structure reduced, and in 16-17 both the amount of taxes almost became same, and in 17-18 again direct tax exceeded indirect tax. It remained high. Again in 2021-22, that is current year, which is still going on, direct tax is 5%, indirect tax is 4.9%. So, in recent times we can say that due to the epidemic, our structure of tax has become less progressive. That much you can say safely. You can't declare it to become regressive because the share of indirect tax is still less. Even you look at revised estimate, both the amounts are same. Next year, again indirect tax is likely to be 5.2% and direct tax is likely to be 5.5%. So, except from certain deviation, if you want to have an opinion for long term tax trend, we can say that our tax structure is generally progressive, but there are certain years when the progressive coefficient has reduced, and this year is also the kind of year which progressive coefficient of tax structure has little bit reduced. So, here is a scope for certain questions. Okay, next is you have to be generally aware. They can expect you to be just aware of the document, that overall expenditure of the government is given, central's expenditure is given as part A, and transfer to the state is given part B. Within central expenditure, there are three components: establishment expenditure, central sector schemes and projects, and other central sector expenditures, of which interest payment is this much. So, what they are expected to that, they can frame a question: what exactly is the composition of taxes? And if we have to see at composition of taxes, look at this way, that in the composition of taxes, establishment expenditure is biggest, that blue line, and then you have that red sub box and then green one. Establishment expenditure is the biggest part of central government expenditure, which is given here, 6,92,000. Then central sector schemes 11,81,000, and other expenditures. Rather, central sector scheme is the biggest expenditure. So, overall composition, they can ask certain questions on expenditure. Capital expenditure is also a kind of expenditure which the finance minister has made a very emphatic claim about, that in recent years capital expenditure of the central government is growing much faster than in previous period, and due to this growing central capital expenditure, the economy is likely to benefit. We have to just understand that revenue expenditures are those expenses of the government which are made to just continue with the existing institutions of the government or existing programs of the government. The old programs and schemes are just run year after year, and the expenses incurred on those schemes are classified revenue expenditure. But if there is some new program or some new institution has been set up, some new infrastructure has been created, the money spent on these new institutions, new infrastructure or new program is classified as capital expenditure. So, capital expenditure suggests that economy is likely to benefit more from government's expenditure point of view. And when government spends money, as the finance minister also used that phrase, it may create crowding in effect. Crowding in effect means, if let us say government is constructing national highway, after the completion of construction of national highway, the private persons and private association of persons are likely to develop restaurants or motels along the highways, or petrol pumps can be opened, vehicle repair centers can be opened, factories can be opened along the national highway, kind of things. So, that means once public expenditure is incurred on creation of capital, private investment is attracted, private investors just crowd in. So, effectively a huge private investment comes after public investment, capital expenditure particularly, and that creates a bigger multiplier effect in the economy. So, based on this understanding, government is having a PPP model or a strategy on the expectation that as the government makes capital expenditure on public infrastructure, private investment would also come. So, this is generally read as public-private partnership. PPP. First public investment, then private investment. Let us say public investment is made this year of 22-23, which continues in 23-24, maybe the same year, maybe after 2 years, private investments would be coming. So, overall investment in the economy would grow, and as the investment grows, the GDP would grow faster. That means growth rate would increase, and this is one of the objectives declared in the budget, that the budget is designed to ensure growth with all inclusiveness and growth with stability, and particularly technology driven growth. So, government has to make initiatives making investment itself, which is part of capital expenditure, and government has to make initiatives in upgrading technology itself, and then attract private parties to further bring in new technology so as to improve productivity in the economy, so as to also make pollution coefficient less, greener economy, and also to guide the private agents to have a circular nature of economy. That means the waste which is which comes out after one round of production is not thrown away, that is utilized further. Interestingly, in this year's budget, the finance minister has read this PPP in a slightly different fashion. Rather than beginning the phrase as public and then followed by private partnership, finance minister said that private public partnership. That is private first and public will follow private investment. This is an interesting change. If she meant it to be like that, we'll have to wait and see, because that is not the established conclusion of many experts worldwide. If let's say we create such policy environment, as the finance minister said that we are going to start next year ease of doing business 2.0, and that many other reforms government is planning to implement next year so as to attract private investment. For example, earlier when a private company entered into infrastructure projects, that means they took contract of construction of infrastructure projects or any other factory, they were not allowed to exit that project. But 3-4 years ago, when Mr. Jaitley was finance minister, he brought about ease of doing business proposal that any company can make an exit from existing infrastructure projects after 2 years of its initiation, which has been in this budget been further reduced to 6 months. So, lock-in period was earlier 2 years, now lock-in period has been reduced to 6 months. So, this is likely to attract private investment because they will not be bothered about getting stuck up in the project. Now, if these reforms like ease of doing business 2 or reduction of lock-in period and financing provisions kind of things, all these things happen and that really attracts private investment, and government believes that first private investors are will be waited to come and then public investment would be made. That will be an interesting change, but it is possible that the phrase used by finance minister was just a mistake. She wanted to say public first and private next, but started with private. Overall, that could be a debate, and just wait for that. In PPP model, public investment first or private investment first? Who will take lead in investment and who would follow? And there could be some debate, and means kind of questions could be framed around it. Okay, so this is there. If you look at the other important documents of budget, some interesting document is, we can take a small note. If you look at this chart, which shows you trends of capital expenditure 14-15 to 22-23, First of all, there is a dark orange color, gross budgetary support, and the light one is grant in aid for creation of capital asset given by the center to states. So this is capital expenditure incurred by the central government, the lower part, and the upper part is the capital expenditure incurred by the state governments, of course with the fund given by the central government. So this suggests that before 1415 or 1415 to 1516, the participation of state governments in creation of capital asset was less, and recent days their role in capital creation is increasing, and that is claimed by the central government as a result of cooperative federalism, that in overall creation of crowding in effect, the central government expenditure is still important because that is sizable part of it, but state government share in creation of crowding in effect is also improving. That's one new trend visible in last 4-5 years. So that's important. Okay, that's it for now about it. Now look at the next page. Expenditure of major items. Here again there are questions on ascending, descending arrangement of kind of things. So one is pension, another is defense, another is subsidy, then other expenses are there. You know that the first three expenses are called revenue expenses, and they contribute in creation of revenue deficit. And if you have to reduce revenue deficit, there are only two ways to do that. Either we reduce revenue expenses or we increase revenue receipts. And we have seen that within revenue receipt there is one tax receipt. So either we increase tax receipt or there is non-tax receipt. So increase non-tax receipt. Both the receipts are increasing. So this year revenue deficit is less than last year, and next year it is further likely to be less on account of increase in revenue receipt, both tax and non-tax, rather than any reduction in revenue expenditure. Revenue expenditure is also growing, but revenue receipt is growing faster. But government is making some efforts. For example, if you look at pension expenditure, in 2020-21 it was 2,08,000. Last year when the budget was made, government proposed 1.89 lakh crore, less than the previous year. And in the revised estimate it is still 1.99 lakh crores, which is less than last year. But next year it is again likely to be 2.07, which is less than 2021. So trend line in your mind should be that in recent years, in last couple of years, pension expenditure of the government has moderately reduced, and that is a matter of relief. Defense expenditure 3,40,000, 3,47,000 in the budget estimate, 3,68,000 in the revised estimate, 3,85,000 in next year's budget. So general trend line is that in recent years, in last couple of years, defense expenditure is growing faster than many other expenses on account of maybe growing uncertainty in the world environment and growing concern. That's it. Now look at subsidy. Subsidy, major subsidy. Three expenses are called major: food, fertilizer, fuel. 3F. Fertilizer, food and petroleum means fuel. Fertilizer subsidy 1,27,922 crores in 2021. Last year it was proposed to be 79,530 crore only. There is a massive reduction, close to 1.3 lakh crore to only 80,000 crore, a reduction of almost 50,000 crores or slightly less than 50,000 crore. But that could not happen. In the revised estimate, fertilizer subsidy was 1,40,000 crores. In the current years, the government had intention to spend less on fertilizer subsidy, but that has not happened, maybe due to growing pressure of the farmer lobby. But next year again the government has proposed that on fertilizer, government is going to spend only 1.06 lakh crores or 0.5 lakh crores. That is 1,05,000 crores. Let's again see how the time happens, how far the farmers are ready to accept that proposal, because reduction of fertilizer subsidy means the amount of fertilizer supplied by the government, central government to state government and from state government to farmers, that amount of fertilizer would be reduced if subsidy is reduced. Now, with less fertilizers available, the cultivation would be organic, of course, and that is one of the intentions of the government. Government has said that we want organic agriculture to grow and inorganic culture to shrink. Less inorganic culture and more organic culture of agriculture, particularly along the rivers, both sides of the rivers. We should use less chemical fertilizers and we should have more organic cultivation. But with reduced supply of fertilizer, farmers would not be very happy. So, there will be protest, and local leadership may also reflect that protest. Food subsidy, in the year of crisis, when there was lockdown and large number of workers were thrown away from their work and government had to offer them free food, free ration. So, food subsidy had grown, shot up to 5,41,000 crore in 2021. But because the situation has eased this year, so that is reduced to initially in budget proposal 2.43 lakh crore, but it is likely to end up around 3 lakh crore. 2.86 is revised estimate. Let's see how much it is there. So, compared to 5.4, if it is 2.8 or even 3 lakh crore, there is some saving of money on food subsidy. Next year, the government is expecting that because economy would be recovering further and the workers who were thrown away from their workplace would be getting back to their work. So, the food support offered to them in the year of crisis would not be required by them. So, food subsidy would reduce further to 2.06 or 0.7 lakh crores. Petroleum subsidy is important. Let us look at this figure. The year when crisis erupted, petroleum subsidy was 38,455 crores. This year, government had an ambitious reduction. Government wanted to spend only 14,073 crores. And to achieve that, petroleum distribution companies were given permission to revise prices upward. So, diesel prices were revised frequently this year so as to reduce subsidy. The revised estimate is even lower, only 6,517 crore, and the next year budget is even less, only 5,813 crore. Government has intention to completely wipe it out, petroleum subsidy, so as to reduce a revenue deficit which is still very high. So, one of the revenue expenditures under target for reduction is subsidy, generally speaking, petroleum subsidy particularly. Other things are routine things. In this budget, the government has accepted that our urban areas are not in good conditions. There is huge pollution, traffic and crowds, etc. and we need to clean up our cities. So, government has said that urban planning needs special care, and a committee has been proposed in the budget which will suggest measures so as to improve the quality of urban planning. And government has also announced that some educational institution, research institution focused on urban planning would be supported by the government, financial support would be given. In this context, you look at the urban development topic. In the current year, for urban development, 46,000, not current year, that is last year 2021, for urban development 46,701 crore was made available. This year in the initial budget 54,581 crore was proposed, but in the revised budget from 54,000 crores, it has been increased to 73,850 crores. That's a huge increase if you look at percentage wise. An increase of almost 20,000 crore over a base of 54,000 crore is almost 35% in the revised estimate. And next year the government is proposed that for urban development 76,549 crore would be made available. So urban development is an important topic. In the coming time, you can expect more questions of conceptual nature from economic geography textbooks. From current affairs point of view, some international comparisons could be there about urban management, urban planning, etc. So this you can take note of, that this is an important topic. Other things, interest expenditure of the government is an important item always. We are spending huge amount of money on interest, from 6,79,000 or 80,000 crore in 2021. This year it was proposed to be 8,09,000 or 10,000. It is next year it is with 9,40,000 crore. So that's the item you can look at. Other things are routine affairs, though you can see that. Now next thing which we need to pay attention to, okay, transfer of resources to states and union territories with legislature. Let us spend a little time on this also. This is also part of largely revenue expenditure, transfer of resources to a state. This is divided into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parts, and if you add up the 5, that will give you total gross transfer to states. So let's total and gross transfers. Both the words are used, total and gross. So total gross transfer includes 5 things. One is devolution of a state's share. In taxes. Second is named as some important transfers. Similarly, the third is finance commission grants. Fourth is total transfer to states. And this is an independent item because this excludes 1, 2, 3 as is mentioned here, other than 1 plus 2 plus 3. And the fifth is total transfer to Delhi and Puducherry. You have just to see that the total gross transfer of resources by the center to states is shown subdivided into 5 parts. Okay, and the gross total gross transfer last year, that in last year was 13,20,000 crore. In this year, current year, it is 16 lakh crores. Next year again it is 16 lakh crore, 16 lakh 3,000, 16 lakh 11,000. So this trend is to be noticed, that in 21-22 the total gross transfer had increased from 13 lakh crores of rupees to 16 lakh crores, 16.03 lakh crores. So this is a good improvement, that is almost 23-24% increase this year. But next year in 22-23, this is going to increase only to 16.11 lakh crores, which is very negligible increase. So next year the state governments are likely to receive less amount. Okay, that's one thing you have to understand. Second thing, which is a matter of a little concern, and here is scope for question. So I'll invite your attention to these figures. Grants for local bodies, urban. Last year 26,710 crores were granted by the central government to state government for local urban bodies. In the current year, which is still going on, the amount is reduced from 26,710 to only 14,614. So there is a reduction of almost 12,000 crores. Next year again, this is more than current year, but less than last year. Last year it was 26,710. Next year it will be 23,000 roughly. Now, this is a point where there could be certain debates that why the government is in this times of crisis, when the local bodies, municipal corporations have a larger role to play in helping citizens, why this grant has been reduced. Similarly, for rural bodies also, grant last year was 60,000 crores. In the current year, it has been reduced to less than 43,000 crores, 42,623 crores, which is a reduction of almost 18,000 crores. Next year, it is going to be increased, but their condition is even poorer. While for urban bodies, the amount would be 23,000 crore, which is slightly less than 26,000, but for rural bodies, it will be 46,000 crore, which is much less compared to last year. So this is a point of concern. Maybe the government has reduced grant for local bodies, both urban and rural, because due to crisis, this amount has been made possible. Mitigation fund has been given, disaster mitigation fund has been given, and post devolution revenue deficit. State governments, even if they were having share, devolution of state share in taxes, state government's share in taxes was given by the center to state, and still some state governments are running into revenue deficit. So just to finance their revenue deficit, Government of India gives them grants. This grant has increased from 74,000 crores last year to 1,18,000 crore this year, and next year also it is likely to be 86,000. So here more money has been provided to state government as support to revenue deficit. Maybe because of that, grant for local body has been reduced, but that's not a good trade-off. That means the grant given to state government to support revenue deficit is at the discretion of the cabinet of the state, and if they have been given more fund to spend and local body has been reduced, that structure of expenditure becomes less federal and more centrist in nature. So that's not in accordance with the principle of cooperative federalism. Particularly local bodies share has been reduced. That is a point of concern that we can take note of. Next thing where we should a little bit take note of is this graph you have all seen. Rupee goes to where? In 2021-22, that is in the current year, 13 paise went for central sector scheme. Next year 15 paise is likely to go for central sector scheme. So, this is an improvement for central sector scheme, that is important. Current year 21-22, 20 paise, that is 20% was spent on interest. This year again 20% going to be spent on interest. In the current year 8 paise, 8% was spent on defense, 8% on defense this year also. Subsidies, 9 paise were spent on subsidies in the current year. Next year only 8 paise are likely to be 8% on subsidies. So, subsidy expenditure has been reduced this year compared to last year. Finance Commission and other transfer, last year was 10 paise, this year again 10 paise. State share of taxes and duties, last year it was 16 paise, this year it is 17 paise. So, that is better. So, that what you have to take note of, that share of states in taxes and duties was only 16, now it is 17. So, this is improvement. Central sector scheme 13 paise, 15 paise, this is improvement and this is satisfactory improvement. Pension, last year it was 5 paise, this year only 4 paise. So, on pension expenditure provision is reducing, which is a relief for the government, but think about the pensioners, maybe the beneficiary is less. Okay. Other expenses last year was 10 paise, this year it is 9 paise. So, this is also good. Other expenses are those which are less productive. And centrally sponsored schemes received 9 paise last year, this year also 9 paise. So, there is no major difference. So, two things which are going to receive positive change is central sector schemes and share of states. Reduction of pension is also there. Apart from this slides which we can show you, there is one more thing which I'll just show you, you have all seen that. So, budget size is 39.45 lakh crore, means this is total expenditure, and as we have seen earlier that total expenditure or total receipt, expenditure is subdivided this side and receipts are divided. So, this grey circles are receipts of revenue nature and this is rather capital nature, and this green one is revenue receipt. So, as we have seen that capital receipts is 17.4 lakh crore, within that debt receipt is 16.61, market loan is 11.45, a small savings and state provident fund is also part of debt receipt, and other debt receipts are there. So, these are all debt receipts, and within capital receipt you know that there is disinvestment etc., which has not been mentioned here. Revenue receipt is subdivided into tax and non-tax. So, this is tax 1, this is non-tax. Tax is further divided into gross tax revenue of 27.5 lakh, GST is this much, excise duty, taxes on income, corporate tax. All these things have been presented in a beautiful graph, but the data we have already analyzed. Similarly, the expenses also we have analyzed already. This is more attractive presentation. So, you can use this graph also to understand things, so as to keep these things in your mind. Apart from these things, another page you can look at, on the slide of which we have not provided here, but I hope that you have got the budget document. So, one page says that outlays on major schemes. So, whether central sector schemes or centrally sponsored scheme. One thing you have to take in note is that there is a central sector scheme and centrally sponsored schemes. So, there are two kinds of schemes, central sector schemes and centrally sponsored schemes. So, all these schemes are further classified by the government. One expression the government uses is core of the core scheme, and within that category 6 schemes have been mentioned. core of the core schemes. So, within core of the core scheme, you have just to remember 3 important titles. One is NREGS or National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, which is also called sometimes in budget document National Rural Employment Guarantee Program. So, be very clear, sometimes they call it program, sometimes scheme. Second is National Social Assistance Program, NSAP, and the third includes 4 schemes: a special program for minorities, a special program for other vulnerable groups, a special umbrella program for STs and umbrella program for SCs. So, there are 4 umbrella programs. One umbrella program for vulnerable groups, another is for minorities, third one is for STs, and fourth one is SCs. These 6 programs have been declared as core of the core schemes. But overall, the budget document mentions 130 schemes have been mentioned. Some of them are new schemes. I think you have already read in newspapers, etc., and some detailed analysis and studies required on those new schemes. But which are the core schemes you have to pay special focus on. There is another category which is called core scheme. So, there are 2 confusing. One is core schemes, another core of the core scheme. Those schemes are important. You should study those schemes especially and more individually, details wise. On every different scheme they can ask question.